This hour of the Costa Report is brought to you by IBM. Big data at the speed of business.
Welcome to the Costa Report. I'm Rebecca Costa, and thank you for joining me for another 2 hours of straight talk radio. I want to take a moment to welcome new listeners joining us on radio stations in all 50 states, as well as our men and women in uniform who are tuning in over the internet. Thank you for your emails, your letters, your cards, and for making us part of your news week. In just a few moments, former co-founder and CEO of AOL and the man called the Washington Tech Whisperer, Mr. Steve Case, will be joining the program to talk about the critical role startups play in the U.S. economy and the importance of spreading capital investments in tech startups throughout our nation. Not surprisingly, most venture investments continue to be concentrated in just 3 locations: California's Silicon Valley, Boston, and New York. But what may come as a surprise are the actual numbers, the actual figures. Those 3 locations gobble up 75% of all venture capital funding for tech startups, leaving roughly 25% for the entire rest of the country, including investment-starved cities like Detroit and Cleveland, Columbus, and other areas. It turns out your odds of securing funding for a new venture has a lot more to do with where you start your business than perhaps anything else. And that's certainly something for those with a business plan in hand to think about. But there are other important factors which make finding capital for a startup challenging, and here the statistics tell the full story. Last year, 90% of all venture capital went to men. So if you're a woman-led startup, your odds are only about 1 in 10 of getting venture backing. And if those odds don't sound very appealing, then consider the fact that only 1% of venture capital was placed with African American-led startups. 1%. Now, before we go painting venture capitalists as sexist or racist or otherwise, let me take a moment to point out that the number of women and African American-led startups pursuing venture capital are significantly fewer than the submissions these firms receive from males of other races. But this fact doesn't alter the statistics or the odds of securing investment capital, which are much more favorable for non-African American males in Silicon Valley, Boston, and New York. And not by a small margin, by a 75% margin, by a 3-to-1 margin. Which begs the question, where does that leave the middle of the country, the Rust Belt, and the rest of us? In the last 3 decades, 30 million jobs have been created by fast-growing startups. They account for all of the net job creation in the United States. But here's something to think about. If that growth is only happening in 3 areas of the country, that would explain why the majority of the United States, much of which rallied for President Trump, by the way, have not seen employment opportunities or the economy improve where they live. That can very simply be explained by the geographic distribution of investment capital in startups and the fact that only certain areas of the country have come back from the recession. That said, there's absolutely no reason to believe that there are not viable business opportunities in other areas of our country, the middle parts of our country, the Rust Belt, cities that are starved for capital. And there's also no reason to believe that women or African American founders are any less likely to succeed. 7 and 8 out of 10 startups aren't going to make it. It's a high-risk proposition to begin with. Fortunately, those that do succeed, like Uber, Twitter, Google, and so on, more than make up for the losses. So venture capitalists and other investors in startups, they do fine in the long run. The business model's a lot like baseball. You only need a few home runs to win the entire game. And once the game is won, well, nobody cares that much about how close it was, except for maybe a few statisticians. Now, 3 years ago, my guest today, Steve Case, the former co-founder and CEO of AOL, he started hitting the road in something he called the Rise of the Rest. It was a bus tour designed to shine a light on entrepreneurs across the entire country. According to Case, it's important to showcase new opportunities for investment in cities like Columbus and Detroit. The fact is, investors get a lot more bang for their buck by going to these areas. Capital investment in technology jobs of tomorrow can revive an economically depressed city. So it's a win-win. In the case of Pittsburgh, which Carnegie Mellon was responsible for attracting investment dollars to, and those dollars, in the case of Pittsburgh, went into self-driving vehicles and robotics. And we all know what a big market that has turned out to be. Today, Pittsburgh is seeing an economic resurgence thanks to investment in tech startups. It seems that wherever that investment capital goes, you can see a direct correlation to how that local economy does. But Case is doing a heck of a lot more than just talk about the importance of diversified capital investment. He's also founded the venture capital firm Revolution, which has invested $850 million in hand-picked startups outside of the 3 main technology hubs. And when Case isn't on the road or guiding Revolution's investment, he's helping shape economic policy in Washington, D.C., right there on DuPont Circle. He's become a strong voice for the Startup Visa program and an advocate for allowing foreign college students to remain in the U.S. when they have valuable and needed skills and they can find employment. Why should we let people get graduate degrees in physics and engineering and mathematics and in a variety of subjects which the nation could benefit from and then kick them out of the country? Doesn't make any sense. According to Case, the country that wins the battle for talent will have the upper hand in the global economy, and graduates who have the dedication and skill to help the U.S. economy, well, we should welcome them. In short, Steve Case, who incidentally is a politically an independent, like your host, believes that greater diversity in investment capital makes for a stronger national economy, and he is tackling that problem on all fronts. He's touring the country to bring attention to investment opportunities in Middle America and the Rust Belt. He's making investments through his company, Revolution, and he's helping to forge policy which will allow startups access to the kind of talent and the funding that they need to succeed. In other words, Steve Case is on the vanguard of greater geographic and demographic business diversity. And it's hard to argue with that. I'll tell you, there is a law in nature, and most of you listening to the program know that I'm a sociobiologist by training, and that law cannot be violated. And the law is this: anything that drives toward singularity is a drive toward extinction, which simply means that the greater the diversity, whether it's geographic, whether it's the type of businesses that are invested in, right, or whether it's the type of founders and the way that they think or behave, is good for endurance. Now, on that note, we have to pause to listen to some important announcements from the sponsors of today's program, but stay with us. You're listening to the Costa Report. If you're a fan of big ideas and thinking, then you're going to want to sink your teeth into On the Verge. Jim Laird, John Scully, Alan Dershowitz, and dozens of business and government leaders from the full political spectrum have given On the Verge their highest reviews. And you can help drive the book to the top of the bestseller list by ordering On the Verge from Amazon right now. Our goal is to distribute 25,000 copies before the official release date. By placing your order for On the Verge right now, you'll help us beat that number. We need every listener to go to Amazon.com and order On the Verge as quickly as you can. And while you're at Amazon, order first edition gift copies of On the Verge for friends and family because they won't last long. On the Verge, on sale now at Amazon.com. That's On the Verge at Amazon.com.
When I say Italy, what comes to mind?
Venice.
Capri. Oh my gosh, Capri was marvelous.
The views, the cliffside views, or traveling to Sorrento. Pirello tours.
Oh, Pirello tours, for sure.
Pirello. Hi, I'm Steve Pirillo of Pirillo Tours. With over 70 years of tour experience to Italy, it's no wonder Pirillo Tours is synonymous with travel to Italy.
I think of the culture.
And to walk up to certain areas and touch a wall and think, well, this wall's like 3,000 years old.
Being on a Pirillo tour on our anniversary was better than anything I can remember ever on an anniversary.
I personally approve every itinerary to ensure a stress-free, once-in-a-lifetime vacation.
Salute! Call now for your free insider's guide to Pirillo's Italy. Call in the next 30 minutes and qualify for a $100 gift card when you travel with us. Call 800-897-7176, 800-897-7176, 800-897-7176.
Ranger Station, Ranger speaking.
Hi, I'd like to report a bear hug.
Uh-huh, okay.
Well, we were building a bonfire, and I saw some, dry brush and leaves around, so, I said to move the bonfire somewhere else, and out of nowhere, Smokey Bear shows up and hugs me.
So you noticed some wildfire hazards and moved your bonfire to a safer location.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's Smokey, all right. He likes it when people help prevent wildfires. It hits him close to home. Not everybody gets the hug, my friend. So that's pretty special to get a hug from Smokey Bear.
So it was him. Hey, guys, I told you it was Smokey.
Okay, well, congratulations, my friend. And thanks for calling. There are many ways to prevent a wildfire. Learn how you can do your part at SmokeyBear.com.
Only you can prevent wildfires.
Sponsored by the U.S. Forest Service, Ad Council, and your state forester.
I am done with my mattress. That's right. I'm not spending another night on this old bag. My new mattress comes today, and this thing is out of here. Bye-bye, mattress.
Yep. Bye-bye, mattress. So says you and about 1,000 other people every day. And that's a lot of old mattresses with no place to go. There's the landfill, of course, where they just take up space. But what a waste. Because you could send it to a mattress recycler, where old mattresses get broken down into steel, foam, wood, and fiber that become new steel, carpet padding, home insulation, garden mulch, biomass fuel, locomotive oil filters, and all kinds of other great stuff. So bye-bye mattress is right. But don't toss it. Recycle it. It's easy, and it's free. To find a mattress recycler in your area, visit buybuymattress.com.
Welcome back to the Costa Report. I'm Rebecca Costa, and my guest today is former co-founder and CEO of AOL and renowned entrepreneur Steve Case, who, as I mentioned earlier, has been called the Washington Tech Whisperer because of the information and also the education that he's providing policymakers on what really and truly drives the U.S. economy, which it turns out is fast-growing, innovative startups. That is the key. And what do those startups need? Well, in addition to a viable business idea and a plan, an actual written plan, and a strong, experienced team of founders and a talent pool, well, they need funding. You have to have capital to get liftoff. But in the United States, you have to be located in Silicon Valley, the Boston area or New York to attract startup money, because more than 75% of venture capital is placed in those three areas, and only 10% of all venture funding is placed with women founders and about 1% with African American founders. So if you're an African American woman living in Cleveland, it doesn't matter if you have a business plan for the next internet, Facebook, or Uber. Your chances of securing the funding you need from a venture capitalist are nil to none. And that is the number one fact that if you have a business plan and you're listening to this broadcast, you ought to be paying attention to. You know, it's easy to get obsessed by the idea that you have and not really understand what the statistics are telling you. And you know, if you've listened to this show for any amount of time, you know I'm all about the data. The data doesn't lie. And while those statistics seem daunting, here's some good news that's on the horizon. And I don't want to be pessimistic because I want to encourage people to get out there and think about forming their own startup or joining up with others to build more small businesses. That's better for the economy, and I want to encourage you. Not only are investment companies like Steve Case's Revolution financing startups outside of the three tech hub areas, and again, his company is called Revolution. You can go online and look it up, and if you're a tech company that's looking for funding, definitely contact Steve Case's company. Particularly if you're outside of the three areas where venture capitalists typically fund. But it's not just Steve Case's company. The internet is opening up the way in which startups all across America are being funded. And of course, I'm talking about crowdsourcing on sites like Kickstarter, GoFundMe, Indiegogo, and Kiva. In 2014, Kickstarter raised almost $450 million in funding for startups, and GoFundMe, which, as you know, is for personal as well as business funding, has distributed over $3 billion since its inception. And not only is this kind of funding more geographically dispersed than where you see venture capital going, there are also some other benefits as well. The founders give much less of their company away out of the starting blocks, and the capital is raised across so many people that the founders are not beholden to one primary debtor. And it translated, that means the founders remain in control of their company. Crowdsourcing is often a fast and easier and actually more probable way to get funding if you're outside of the three technology hub areas and if you don't require a lot of money to get your idea off the ground. And if the founders of the startup have the experience needed to take a company from idea to fruition, which incidentally, in most cases, they don't, then it's a good way to go. On the other hand, while much has been made about the negatives of venture capital funding, in my view, not enough has been made about the guidance and the mentoring that VC firms offer. Venture capitalists have seen it all. They know where all the mines in the minefield are. And since they have skin in the game, they're going to do everything and anything possible to help the companies they invest in succeed. Which is why very often, just prior to a public offering, the founding team is asked to take more specific roles in the company so VC investors can bring in professionals who have the knowledge and the experience to operate a larger, more mature organization. In my time in Silicon Valley, I saw this happen many times. The founding engineers were relegated to research and development, and a professional management team was brought in to run the business. And this didn't always sit well with the people whose idea and sweat was the very reason the company existed, but it was in the best interest of the company. And that is the only motive venture capitalists have. They'll do whatever is needed to grow the value of the asset that they've invested in. And it's just that plain and simple. One more thing. It takes a strong ego to venture out on your own and do a startup. And sometimes that ego is a good thing, and sometimes it can become the very reason a startup fails. Strength and passion are good things. They're critical if you want to beat the odds. But they also have the ability to cause business blindness. And this is where the experience of venture capitalists play an important role. In my view, there's a trade-off between the ease, freedom, and fairness of using crowdsourcing to capitalize a startup and the experience and much deeper pockets offered by today's venture capitalists. And it's a smart person that draws a distinction between those two sources and knows the difference. That said, there is one thing Steve Case is right about, and that is that the methods for funding startups are opening up, and this will allow for more geographically and demographically distributed funding throughout the United States, instead of the current concentration in just 3 locations. Once again, what is true for nature is also true for business. In nature, any drive towards singularity is a drive toward extinction, which again means the more diversification, the more the stability and growth we'll see in the U.S. economy. Diversification, it turns out, is the antidote to instability. We all know that from our personal financial portfolios. We're not betting on one stock or 2 stocks, 1 or 2 bond portfolios. We spread it around. And why do we do that? Because a portfolio that's diverse and spread around through a lot of financial instruments is one that's more stable. In that regard, geographic diversity, demographic diversity in terms of startup investment is a good thing. It leads to growth. It leads to stability. It paves the way for a strong economy. And to this end, Steve Case has got a big mission in front of him, but he's nailed it, and we want to support his work and his company's work. Now we have to take a short intermission. When we return, we'll be speaking to former AOL co-founder and CEO Steve Case. Stay with us. You're listening to the Costa Report. I'm here today with Scott Caraccioli of Caraccioli Cellars. Scott, we keep hearing about the wines that are being developed in Monterey County. How would you describe the climate conditions for grapes?
Monterey County has a lot of little pockets that give you the opportunity to grow a variety of grapes. It comes down to the match of location and climate with the varietal that you're going to grow. And where we grow in the Highlands, it's prototypical cool climate. We're even in the northern side of the Highlands. So that is ideal for both Pinot and Chardonnay. Chardonnay strives really well in a lot of our county, as well as Pinot, but I would say that this is the most optimal location. You get wind, you get sun exposure. The benches come off of the inland side of the coastal mountains. It's an optimal position. You can order any of our products directly from us by visiting our website, caracciolicellars.com, or calling the tasting room directly, 831-622-7722.
I'm Paul George of the Indiana Pacers. When I was 6, I had one thing on my mind. When I was 6, my days were spent playing basketball every chance I could. When I was 6, my dream was to make it to the NBA. When I was 6, my mom had a stroke. So I want you to learn the signs of a stroke fast. F-A-S-T. F, face drooping. A, arm weakness. S, speech difficulty. T, time to call 911. Because the sooner they get to the hospital, the sooner they'll get treatment. And that can make a remarkable difference in their recovery. I'm Paul George. Protect the ones you love. Spot a stroke F-A-S-T. Fast. Life is why. Visit strokeassociation.org. Brought to you by the American Stroke Association and the Ad Council.
Women now make up 37% of the workforce, changing their role forever.
Harvard Medical School has now opened its doors to new female applicants.
The first woman is now in space.
The majority of last year's doctorate degrees were earned by women.
We've come so far, but our news is changing for the worse. More women die from heart disease and stroke than men, even though it can be prevented. Make a change at GoRedForWomen.org today. Brought to you by the Ad Council and the American Heart Association's Go Red for Women.
Okay, what are you wearing right now?
Nothing.
That's right. So Mommy's going to teach you how to dress yourself. Underwear always comes first, name tag at the back, then pants, then shirt. Get the first button in the right hole or you have to start all over. Socks going first, then shoes, right on right, left on left. With shoelaces, just take the ends, cross them over, switch the loops. The rabbit goes down the hole, pull tight, and you're left with bunny ears. Got it? Why are your pants on your head?
Most parenting's hard to do in just 2 minutes. But 2 minutes twice a day making sure they brush their teeth is easier, and it could help save them from a lifetime of tooth pain. Visit 2min2x.org to find out more. A message from the Partnership for Healthy Mouths, Healthy Lives, and the Ad Council.
Psst. Yeah, you, it's me, your heart. Listen to me. We've got to talk. High blood pressure is serious, and yours? Whoa. What happened to us? We used to be so much more active. But lately you've been ignoring me. I know you think I'm just gonna keep ticking away forever, but you're wrong. You can do so much more to control your high blood pressure. Doing the minimum isn't doing enough. I'm under a lot of pressure and can quit whenever I want. Bet you didn't know that. But I like my job. Just treat me better. Check on me. Give me something green to nibble on every once in a while. And maybe we can do some exercise on occasion. Let's get to it. After all, we're in this together.
Listen to your heart. Don't let it quit on you. High blood pressure can lead to a stroke, heart attack, or death. Get your blood pressure to a healthy range before it's too late. Find out how at heart.org/blood pressure. Check, change, control. A message from the American Heart Association, the American Stroke Association, and the Ad Council.
Welcome back to the Costa Report. I'm Rebecca Costa, and joining us now is the former CEO of AOL and the entrepreneur responsible for shedding light on the fact that the vast majority of venture capital funding occurs in just 3 locations in the country, Mr. Steve Case. Thank you for joining us, Mr. Case.
Great to be with you, Rebecca.
Now, before you joined us, I was pointing out that roughly 75% of venture capital goes to startups in Silicon Valley, the Boston area, and New York. But what I wasn't able to explain is why these investments are geographically concentrated. Would you mind speaking to that?
Sure. It is sort of crazy because there are obviously great entrepreneurs all over the country, but just the way venture capital, which is a relatively recent phenomenon, just the last half century or so, developed in California, New York, and Massachusetts, and then obviously the ecosystem around Silicon Valley, which has birthed a lot of great companies. It's just led a lot of investors who are in those places just to focus on companies down the street, companies they can drive to, and not necessarily spend the extra time to get on planes and fly to different parts of the country to see what's happening there. I think that's beginning to change, and that's part we're obviously trying to push forward with this Rise of the Rest initiative.
Is this a case where there's so much supply of startups that need funding in those 3 areas that they don't have to look elsewhere?
There's some of that. There's certainly, you hear that from some of the venture capitalists in places like Silicon Valley. There's so many entrepreneurs doing things there. Why bother looking further? I think that is beginning to change, in part because the valuations in Silicon Valley have gotten bid up. The fact that all the investors are focusing on the same people in the same places means valuations are higher, and valuations tend to be lower in these emerging Rise of the Rest cities. Over time, as sort of this next wave, what I've called the third wave of the internet, really takes hold, and it's really about disrupting, innovating in sectors like healthcare and food and agriculture and things like that. I think some of the expertise necessary will be in the middle of the country, and that if we can get the right capital to the right entrepreneurs in those places, I think will result in some real breakout successes in the middle of the country that might surprise some people on the coast.
Along those lines, you've called Silicon Valley tone deaf to the needs of the rest of the country, and I spent most of my career working in Silicon Valley, so I have to agree with you on that point. The Valley's like one massive college campus, and what occurs outside that campus barely exists. There's no other universe. So what do tech companies and venture capitalists need specifically to do to create a more inclusive innovation economy?
Well, first of all, I should say I love Silicon Valley, and there's great things happening there that will continue. So when we talk about the rise of the rest and the rise of other cities, it's not anything negative about Silicon Valley. It's more something positive about the rest of the country. But I do think there's some in Silicon Valley that have been tone deaf, haven't really understood the implications of some of the innovations, how while it might improve people's lives in certain respects, some new smartphone app, for example, it also can have a negative impact on people, and job destruction is one aspect of that. And so just understanding the broader implications of innovation, the broader implications of technology, and being a little bit more empathetic in terms of what some people around the country are dealing with, some of the struggles they're having, I think is important. I also think it's important to start paying attention to the entrepreneurs in these other places, recognize they too are doing innovative things and building great companies, and that if you do back those entrepreneurs, it's not just a good thing to do because I think it helps create jobs and opportunity in these places, but it's also a smart thing to do because the valuations, as I said, are lower. And so when the companies are successful, you can actually even generate a greater return. So I think that understanding, that awakening, if you will, is beginning to emerge, and hopefully that will accelerate in the years to come.
Well, let's talk about these new sources of funding, like crowdfunding, like Kickstarter, for example. Won't we organically see more tech startups in places outside of the three major hubs?
Yes, and that is a great example of that. The Kickstarter Indiegogo phenomenon around project crowdfunding, pre-buying a product or kind of a documentary or what it might be, has been a game changer. Billions of dollars has flowed to these projects on these sites, and many of them then use that capital to not just launch a product, but to launch a company. And it does help level the playing field, which I think is important. We're now able to supplement that. There's the Jobs Act that passed 5 years ago by Congress, basically allows you to use the internet now to raise capital for your startup through equity crowdfunding or debt crowdfunding. I think that's important as well. So there are lots of different ways to try to create more momentum around these entrepreneurs in these other places. Even locally, there's the development of angel networks and accelerators in many of the cities that we've visited. Those too are encouraging. But ultimately, most of the capital still is on the coast, and we need to get more of the investors on the coast paying attention to what's happening in the middle of the country.
Now, you've used Columbus, Ohio as an example of what happens when startup investment capital moves into new areas. Can you tell us about what's going on there to stimulate more innovation startups?
A number of things. And actually, our new partner at Revolution, a gentleman by the name of J.D. Vance, who wrote the book Hillbilly Elegy, grew up in Ohio, had some success, was in Silicon Valley as a venture capitalist, and just recently, a couple of months ago, decided to move back to Columbus and be part of kind of the startup ecosystem in Columbus. But there's good momentum there. There's a very strong university there. There recently was a significant $1 billion plus kind of successful acquisition, a company called Cover My Meds. There's now a major venture capital firm, Drive Capital, based there. There's a lot of momentum around smart cities, partly because Columbus won a big smart cities challenge. I think it was a $50 million federal grant that can actually end up flexing up to as much as $500 million with local and private matching. So Columbus is now one of the kind of the interesting places to watch in terms of smart cities. There's also a lot of history in Columbus and retailing and other sectors. There's been a lot of innovation there. So it's a perfect example of a rise to rest city. Most people don't know, what's happening in Columbus, but if they actually visit, I think they will be surprised by the level of economic development and how there's now a burgeoning startup community. We just want to do that or see that happen in dozens of cities all over the country, and hopefully that will happen over the coming decade.
Well, they certainly have presented an excellent model of the principles that you talk about, which is the importance of these Rust Belt or Middle American cities attracting startup capital. You also consider Pittsburgh to be an example of a city which, thanks to investments in technology companies by Carnegie Mellon, has gone through a resurgence.
Yeah, it's a great example because Pittsburgh sort of powered the whole industrial revolution a century ago, was the steel city and used to, making things and had a very bright future, and then struggled and half a century ago was having some real challenges. Now it's, roaring back and it's one of the hotbeds of innovation around robotics technology, in part because Carnegie Mellon's so strong there. Even companies like Google now have a large presence in Pittsburgh. Uber, much of their self-driving car innovation is happening in Pittsburgh. And it is an example, but it's also important to note the arc of what has happened over the past few decades. A city like Pittsburgh a couple decades ago had a huge brain drain, that people grew up there or went to school at Carnegie Mellon and other places, often left to go to the coast because they didn't really see the opportunity if they stayed in Pittsburgh or Columbus or Des Moines or Madison or other cities in the middle of the country. That is beginning to change. There are now more people who are graduating from Carnegie Mellon, for example, who are staying in Pittsburgh. They think it's a great city and there's great opportunity there. And we're also seeing the beginnings of sort of a boomerang of talent. The people who left because they didn't think there was opportunity where they were living are now beginning to go back, and they want to do that often for personal reasons. They want to raise their families there. Sometimes for financial reasons, the cost of living is much lower there. Sometimes also they just want to be part of the renaissance of the city. I remember meeting an entrepreneur in Detroit about 3 years ago who won our pitch competition, our Rise of the Rest pitch competition. He had just moved his company from San Francisco to Detroit because he did understand there was a cost of living difference. He did have some family ties and wanted to go back, but he also wanted to be part of the resurgence, the renaissance of Detroit. I'm seeing that more and more. I'm hearing those stories more and more. I think it bodes well for this Rise of the Rest phenomenon.
Well, you were certainly preaching to the choir here, sir. I recently moved my headquarters from the heart of Silicon Valley to Astoria, Oregon. So I know exactly what you're talking about a lower cost of living and choosing an easier and simpler lifestyle. We have to take a short break, but stay where you are. We'll be right back with more from Steve Case. You're listening to the Costa Report. Listen up, because I want to let you in on a little secret. You don't have to be a psychic to know which business and political experts are going to be on the Costa Report next month. All you have to do is sign up for our free monthly newsletter at RebeccaCosta.com. It takes less than a minute, and when you do, you'll receive our guest schedule along with special announcements and free offers the first of every month. So go to RebeccaCosta.com and sign up today.
Hi, I'm Joan London. If you're worried about your parent or loved one living alone, like I was, and you want reliable senior care information, then call A Place for Mom, the nation's largest senior living referral service.
Finding an apartment that was on the courtyard with the view of the trees, the view of the ducks, the stream, the creek, all of that was what I needed.
You'll get free information on assisted living, Alzheimer's care, nursing homes, even important financial information. Here's the number.
To speak with a local senior living advisor, call A Place for Mom at 800-451-2976. That's 800-451-2976.
A Place for Mom is a free service, and you can trust them to help you. So if you're struggling to find reliable senior living information, there's a place for answers, A Place for Mom.
To speak with a local senior living advisor, call A Place for Mom at 800-451-2976. That's 800-451-2976.
Hi there, I'm Bob Eubanks. You know, as part of Hollywood for a long time, I've seen my fair share of celebrities get in trouble with the IRS. Well, there's one name I trust, the Tax Defense Group. So if you owe more than $10,000 to the IRS, you really need to call my friends at the Tax Defense Group. They offer a 100% satisfaction guarantee, and they're open 24 hours a day because they know that tax debt doesn't sleep either.
Call 800-257-2910. 800-257-2910.
It may be hard to believe, but people just like you are already saving money. FeedThePig.org makes it easy. Their simple savings plan teaches you how to start saving without going overboard. So you don't need to mooch off your friends.
You gonna finish that grape?
You mean the one in my mouth? You don't need to stop buying the necessities.
What you're smelling is a natural musk.
Ew.
You don't need to be a medical test subject.
How do you feel?
Mostly okay. Sometimes, though.
You don't need to get a second job as a stuntman.
We need a new stuntman. Let's break for lunch.
You just need an internet connection. Don't get left behind. Start your personal savings plan with the tips and tools on feedthepig.org. That way, you don't need to sell your soul to the devil.
$15 is the best I can do.
All right, deal. Brought to you by the American Institute of CPAs and the Ad Council.
Hey, America. We need to have a little talk. I don't know if you've noticed, but we got a lot of food in this country. A lot of peaches, a lot of corn, a lot of apples, a lot of everything. We've got so much food that we can't even eat it all. So if we got all this extra food, how are 17 million kids in America struggling with hunger? I just don't get it. That's why the Feeding America nationwide network of food banks gathers surplus food and gets it to the hungry kids who need it. They can get you food even if you live in Idaho or Alaska or somewhere crazy like that. This isn't complicated. We got extra food and we've got hungry kids. Feeding America's done the math. Now it's your turn. Support Feeding America and your local food bank at feedingamerica.org. I know you got internet on your phone, so what are you waiting for? We can't do it without your help. Brought to you by Feeding America and the Ad Council.
Welcome back to the Costa Report. I'm Rebecca Costa, and my guest today is Steve Case. And before the break, you were making the point that many cities experiencing a depressed economy not only suffer from low investment capital in innovative startups, but also experience a brain drain as skilled individuals are forced to move out of their homes or maybe where they were raised and move to areas of the country where they have better opportunities. But many of those individuals do come back when a local economy improves. So let's talk about talent for a moment. I understand you're advocating something called a startup visa program. Can you tell us what that is and how that would work?
Sure. No, I think at the end of the day, innovation, entrepreneurship is about the ideas. It's about the passionate, teams, and at the core, while capital is important, the people, the talent aspect is the most important. So in each of these different cities around the country, we have to do everything we can to be a magnet for talent. How do we keep people there, and how do we get people to move back there, or perhaps move there for the first time? The cities that do that most effectively, frankly, the countries that do that most effectively, are going to be the winners in the future. And the startup visa provision has been talked about for about a decade, and it's basically the idea of people come here to the United States for maybe a PhD or something, and they have an idea they want to start a company. They should have the ability to stay here and start that company here, which then creates economic growth and jobs here. A great example of getting this wrong is there was a company, or an entrepreneur who started a company called Snapdeal after he graduated from Wharton in Pennsylvania. He tried to stay in Pennsylvania, wasn't able to extend his visa. At the time, there wasn't a startup visa kind of provision. So as a result, he had to go home. And he happened to be from India. Now that company has 5,000 employees in India. And it could have been 5,000 employees in Pennsylvania. So how do we continue to be a magnet for those kind of folks who can be, job creators? And there's obviously a lot of sensitivity around immigration and some, concerns around the border and things like that. But at the end of the day, we have to continue to be that magnet for talent if we're going to continue to be the most innovative entrepreneurial nation.
So how do we do that from an immigration standpoint? I mean, how do we create criteria for a provision for someone like the individual you were talking about, graduated from Wharton, had a business idea, was fundable, and has since proven that he had the right idea? He hired 5,000 employees. How do we do it?
Is there something the best solution would be for Congress to figure out what the right legislation would be a permanent solution. There's at least a temporary way to deal with it. Something was put in place last year called the International Entrepreneur Rule, which actually goes into effect next week on July 17th. That would, at least on a test basis, play this out. And they put some provisions in place in terms of having to raise a certain amount of capital, having to hire a certain number of people to qualify for this startup visa kind of provision. Hopefully that will go in place. Hopefully that will work, and hopefully that will get extended so it's a permanent solution. And if you just look at the data here, it's pretty compelling. About 40% of our Fortune 500 companies, our largest, most successful companies, were started by immigrants. So we've always been an immigrant nation. We need to continue to attract people that are the job creators.
Yeah, I like what you just said, though. You create criteria. You say there's X number of dollars that have to be raised for your startup. You have to hire X number of people. As long as the criteria is concrete and it's spelled out clearly, there shouldn't be a problem with it, should there?
No, I agree with that. No, it usually gets caught up in this broader, more complicated, frankly, more emotional debate around immigration and immigration reform. And so I think most people, most Republicans, most Democrats do believe in the startup visa idea, do believe that those are, because those are job creators, they're folks that we do want here. Some of our, most successful tech companies like Apple, Steve Jobs was the son of a Syrian refugee. A company like Google, one of the co-founders, Sergey Brin, was from Russia. And so thankfully their families ended up coming to the United States because as a result we have companies like Apple and Google here as opposed to in other countries. So obviously there are many facets to this that we need to focus on as we think about immigration. And obviously we also need to do a better job of trying to educate our own kids so that we have as many innovative entrepreneurial kids coming out of our schools as possible. But we also need to recognize that we're now essentially seeing a global competition around entrepreneurship. Many countries have figured out that the secret sauce that's made America so great is innovation and entrepreneurship. It's worth remembering 250 years ago, America itself was a startup. It was really just an idea and sort of a fragile idea. And then we led the way in the agricultural revolution, then led the way in the industrial revolution, then led the way in the technology revolution. And that's why the United States has gone from this tiny, fragile startup nation to the leader of the free world with the largest economy. So we have to continue to build on that history and make sure we are innovating in the future.
And it's not only the talent that are the founders or idea generators for startups. Many of the tech companies in Boston, New York, and Silicon Valley complain that they have jobs they cannot fill.
Yeah, that's true really across the board, all kinds of different companies, all kinds of different cities. And it goes back to rethinking your education system and making sure that people are taught the skills either when they're young or even later in life when they get retrained for the jobs of the future. That's going to be an ongoing challenge, but it also creates a opportunity to make sure that we have a workforce that is as skilled as possible and as competitive as possible.
Now, I'm going to switch gears here for just a moment because we only have a few minutes, and I want to talk about your book, The Third Wave. Tell us a little bit about what that third wave is. I think you said the first wave was AOL and in the D.C. area, Dell in the Austin area. The first opening of the Internet was really regional. And then that second wave included Silicon Valley, where Google, Facebook, Apple, and thousands of app companies are now located. What's this third wave?
No, it's been an interesting arc. And when I got started as an entrepreneur, I was a co-founder of America Online, AOL, 32 years ago. And back then, only 3% of people were online, and they were online an average of just 1 hour a week. So it was really the early days in terms of educating people about the power and possibility of the Internet. And that really was that first wave. It was sort of the on-ramps to get people connected to the Internet and educate people about the value of being connected to the Internet. Once that happened and everybody was connected, the second wave, the last 15 years or so, has been those apps and software services on top of the Internet. You mentioned some of the examples, and obviously some great successes there. Now the third wave, I think, is maybe most interesting of all, which is really integrating the Internet in much more seamless and pervasive, sometimes even invisible ways throughout our lives, and the process improve how we think about healthcare and learning and energy and transportation and food and agriculture. Really some of the most important aspects of our lives that have changed a little bit in the first wave and the second wave, but haven't changed all that much, but will change, I think, a lot in the third wave. But my bet is it's going to require a different mentality for entrepreneurs, different roadmap for innovators. Some of that is going to be place-based, which is why promoting regional entrepreneurship, this Rise the Rest, is important. Partnerships are also going to be more important. I don't think you're going to revolutionize healthcare just by creating an app. It's about working with doctors and hospitals. And policy is going to become more important. Many of these are regulated sectors, and we can debate what the regulation should be, but there can be some kind of regulations around drug safety or drones in the skies or driverless cars on the road. So that's going to require a different mindset for for entrepreneurs to be successful in the third wave. But ultimately, it has a great opportunity to improve people's lives and build some significant, iconic entrepreneurial businesses, again, not just on the coast, but also in the middle of the country.
I think you're absolutely spot on about that. The book is called The Third Wave. If there are listeners out there that don't have this book, I strongly recommend that you pick it up. This is going to be the marriage between industry-specific knowledge and the technologies that are being developed for tomorrow. They have to come together in a closer way, and I think that that will be the third wave, no question. Unfortunately, that's all the time that we have left, but before we say goodbye, let me congratulate you on the success of your book, and on behalf of tech startups in the Rust Belt and Middle America, thank you for shedding light on funding opportunities throughout the country. Thank you, Mr. Case.
Thank you, Rebecca. It's been great being with you.
If your station is leaving us after this hour, my guest next week is former United States Senator and Senate Majority Leader, United States Senator from Maine, I should say, and Senate Majority Leader George Mitchell. He'll be here to talk about the prospects for peace in the Middle East during our lifetime. Wouldn't that be nice? I know some of you are shaking your heads, but you got to hear what George Mitchell has to say. Don't miss George Mitchell next week on the only news program that puts policy ahead of politics. Now stay tuned for another hour of Straight Talk Radio. You're listening to the Costa Report.
Hi, it's MZ from KSCO in Santa Cruz, and though I don't care much for people who brag, I'm going to do just a little of it now, and hope you will give me a pass by calling it just being proud. Our station can afford to be innovative and refreshingly different because we use education and logic to promote great health products that change people's lives for the better. We also help people build strong businesses that create residual income through a wonderful low-cost business opportunity that we have developed and refined during the last 20 years. We believe that Rebecca Costa's large audience is comprised of particularly intelligent and educated persons, some of whom may want to earn more money. If you are tired of being someone else's wage slave and are ready to go to work building your own excellent supplement business that can provide you and your family income and become a saleable and willable asset, I want to talk with you. Send an email to mz@wedon'thavetobepoor.com. That's mz@wedon'thavetobepoor.com.
Unexpected reactions to smart financial decisions brought to you by feedthepig.org.
Well, I finally did it. I improved my credit score.
You're kidding, right?
No.
How are we supposed to be the bad boys of electro-synth pop if you're out there being responsible? The band is about to be discovered. This is our year.
Yeah, you've been saying that for a while now.
You think anyone in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame was worried about their credit score?
I never really thought that.
Of course they weren't. Rock stars aren't supposed to think about that kind of stuff. We're supposed to think about how many guitars we've smashed, write aggressively sensitive power ballads, start questionable fashion trends, tragically break up and blame creative differences.
All right. I thought maybe it was time to take control of my finances, you know? Start using a budget. Get out of debt. Set some goals.
A budget? Debt? Set some goals? Listen, I knew that we'd have our creative differences, but I was hoping they'd involve a little more scandal.
When it comes to financial stability, don't get left behind. Get tools and tips for saving at feedthepig.org. This message brought to you by the American Institute of CPAs and the Ad Council.
The Costa Report is now heard in all 50 states on fine radio stations, including this one.